Thank you very much. Okay, so our topic today is monetary policy and fiscal policy. So the first question we are going to be answering is what is monetary policy in essence? Okay, monetary policy is basically a set of tools used by a nation's central bank, in particular rather, the central bank to control the overall money supply and promote economic growth. Basically, it's just controlling the amount of money in circulation in order to foster economic growth. So there are some basic strategies that the government, I mean, the Central Bank of Nigeria rather, uses to um, address monetary policies. They have strategies such as interest rates, changing bank reserve requirements. When you have a high cash reserve ratio in a nation, right, it's just essentially saying that this is a contractionary monetary policy because when you have the banks putting a high or keeping a high level of liquidity or money in terms of proportion or percentage with the central bank, it's just essentially saying that you have less money in supply in the economy. Like I said before, monetary policy is controlling money supply in the economy, right? So you have, like I said, interest rates, bank reserve requirements, and I've explained that. So you have two major types of monetary policies, which are contractionary and expansionary monetary policies. Contractionary, expansionary. Contractionary means reduced money in supply. Expansionary, more money in supply. It's very basic. Being a monetary policy in a nation, or what are the goals of monetary policy? Curbing inflation, number one. I mean, like when you have too much money chasing too few goods, you have a high level of inflation. That's inflation in essence. So, in an economy, if you have continuous expansionary monetary policies, the economies tend to be affected by inflation because you have a lot of money in supply, right? So this has to be controlled. That's the goal of monetary policy. Also, unemployment. If we're familiar with the Phillips curve, anything that raises inflation reduces unemployment. So if an expansionary monetary policy is raising inflation, right, unemployment is reducing. There has to be a balance between controlling the level of inflation and controlling the level of unemployment being addressed by the monetary policy. That's why we don't just expand or do expansionary all the way or contractionary all the way. It has to be balanced relative to the economy um, being addressed. So another key goal of monetary policy is tackling exchange rates. I mean, like exchange rate is very much determined by the amount of money in supply, right? When you have too much money in supply in an economy, it's essentially going to reduce the value of that currency relative to foreign currencies. That's devaluing or reducing the level of exchange rate of a domestic economy. So you want to, as an economy or as an economist, you want to address monetary policies very smartly in order not to devalue your currency too much, right? So there are some basic tools. These are the tools now used by the central bank to address monetary policies or to carry out monetary policies. First of all, I'm going to be talking about the open market operation. All right. Let me just explain briefly what open market operation is. Open market operation is just basically the um, government issuing out bonds, right? Or just selling, buying of bonds, government securities, in order to change the amount of government securities and money available in the economy, right? If the government sells more bonds, right, is taking the money from the public and keeping to itself. That's a contractionary monetary policy, right? But if it buys, right, the government is issuing out cash, issuing out liquidity into the economy. That's your expansionary monetary policy. So those are very that's a very key tool in addressing monetary policy. Another one is interest rates, right? You can have the interest rates. Interest rates is just basically the amount charged on loans, right? If you have a high level of interest rates in an economy, you're just saying, oh, you are not encouraging borrowing. People are not going to demand for cash, right? But if you're having a lower level of interest rates in an economy, there will be a high demand for loans, there will be a higher demand for credit facility, and all of that. And another one is reserve requirements. I've already explained that previously. So let me just basically digress into fiscal policy, right? There's not really much to talk on fiscal policy. Let me just explain what it is and briefly differentiate what the difference between fiscal and monetary policy. Okay, like I said earlier, right? Monetary policy is carried out by the Central Bank of Nigeria. In case of Nigeria, right, it's carried out by the central bank. But fiscal policy, right, is a tool used by the government, right, and not the central bank. It is the use of government spending and taxation to influence the economy, right? So monetary, that's the key difference. Monetary, central bank; fiscal, government, right? So what does fiscal policy basically entail? Government addressing spending and taxation. That is
I just want
fiscal
you to
policy.
lead us into the next phase of the session, and which is like discussion on certain monetary policies that have been implemented recently. So what's that one policy that has been implemented recently, and how can you, or what can you say about the policy in terms of assessing the policy?
All right. Let me not just go to the immediate policies that have been implemented. Let's go back down memory lane a bit, right? So, if we're addressing the monetary policy performance in Nigeria, let's say from 2008 to 2011, right? There was a monetary policy review in this period, and in that same period, there was a global financial crisis. This was what stimulated that monetary policy review, right? The crisis started in 2007 in the United States, but it spread to other countries and also Nigeria. This crisis created a very big liquidity issue in the banking system, and consequently, the central bank had to um, take drastic measures in addressing monetary policy, right, and money available in the economy. This necessitated an expansionary monetary policy because I mean, like when you have liquidity issues, you have to increase the amount of money in circulation. That was the issue that we were facing as a country in Nigeria during that period. So some particular steps or things were taken because monetary policy is just basically activities that are carried out in order to increase or decrease money in supply. So, what activities were carried out, or what actions were taken, or what steps were taken? Okay, so there was a stoppage of an aggressive liquidity mop. Liquidity mop is just saying, oh, taking money in circulation and keeping it with the central bank. So there was a stoppage of that aggressive liquidity mop in that period. Then there was a reduction in the monetary policy rate, right? And there was also a reduction in the cash reserve requirement, like I explained previously. The proportion or percentage of liquidity or money that the commercial banks are expected to keep with the central banks, there was a reduction in this reserve requirement, thereby fostering more money in circulation and more um, access to money by the public, right? So, also there was an injection of 620 billion naira, right, as tier 2 capital in 8 troubled banks in Nigeria. There was an injection of 620 billion as tier 2 capital in 8 troubled banks, right? So yeah, that was a particular monetary policy that was carried out within the space of 2008 to 2011. So if we address this monetary policy that was carried out, we can see that it was basically an expansionary monetary policy, and it was geared towards controlling the prevailing circumstance or controlling the prevailing crisis that affected the banking system in Nigeria during that period. So we can see how effective monetary policy is in addressing economic issues, right? So let me address another monetary policy that was also carried out. Following the restoration of stability in the bank, because during that time period, 2008 2011, there was a restoration of the liquidity level in Nigeria and everything was fine, right? But following that restoration of stability, the banks, there was now an adverse effect of this expansionary monetary policy. Let's just say they expanded it too much, so they had to contract. Do you understand?
Mm,
So this happened from September 2010 to December 2011. They had to take steps to contract because towards the end of that 2008 monetary policy, there was like it was too much, so they had to take steps to counter what had already been done in order to find a balance, right? So the previous easing expansionary policy put a lot of pressure on inflation, right? Exchange rates and external reserves. So in order to curtail this, there was a contractionary policy. So some other things too were carried out. These other things that were done are just were just basically an opposite of what was done before, right? So there was a resumption of active open market operation, like I explained previously. Open market operation, allowing individuals to buy bonds, sell bonds, and all of that. So there was a resumption of active open market operation, and there was an increase in the monetary policy rate, and there was also an increase in cash reserve requirements. That means proportion of money banks are central banks keeping for central commercial banks rather. So yes, let me now go to the recent monetary policy. Right, there was a monetary policy carried out in I think one of the most recent is March 20th, 2022. Right, so this monetary policy was geared towards raising the monetary policy rate from 17.5% to 18%, right? And also to retain, that was the only significant thing that was done, raising the monetary policy rate from 17.5% to 18%, right? And retaining cash reserve ratio at 32.5%, and also retaining the liquidity ratio at 30%. Those were the major things that were done in this most recent monetary policy. So yeah, that's what we have. So if we are to assess this recent monetary policy, right, retaining the cash reserve requirements is basically saying, oh, this level of um, cash that the commercial banks are keeping with the central bank is sufficient. This is sufficient. This is a sufficient level of reserve. It is not affecting the economy adversely in terms of it being too much or it being too low. So it is a they are just basically saying it strikes a perfect balance, being at 32.5%,
Efficient.
and retaining liquidity at 30% is also stating the same thing. Liquidity ratio, that the money in supply in the economy, right, at 30% is relatively balanced, right? In terms of it being too much or it being too little, it strikes a perfect balance. So that is the basic analysis of the most recent monetary policy.
Also um, affected our economy badly was the change of currency templates, basically the change of design, currency design. It's also a way you could also classify it under monetary policy, because for economic policies, it can be divided into two, right? As we rightly know, which the fiscal policy and the monetary policy, right? So fiscal policy basically is just the increase in government expenditure or reduction in tax, either contractionary or expansionary, right? So any other policy that does not fall under fiscal, at the end of the day, any economic policy that does not fall under fiscal policy is monetary policy. And also the redesign of currency can also be regarded as monetary policy. At the end of the day, I keep saying on paper it was a very good policy on paper, right? Because at the end of the day, we saw that the economy was trying to recover, but based on the macroeconomic shock that we experienced, right? And that policy also triggered the shock to have an exponential dire effect on the economy, right? So for me, the problem there was implementation, like I've always said, right? The designing of the policy was good, the idea behind it was good, but the implementation was what has always been a problem for us. So Jesse has mentioned several and several policies, monetary policies that are taking place. And I think one that I also want to um mention is the MPR, that's the monetary policy rate, right? It has been increased to 18.5 as at 2 months ago or last month, right? And I mean, thinking about that, you could just understand that was one of the highest so far, right? For in Africa, one of the highest in Africa. And you see things like treasury bill rates at just 5.38%. That means when you invest in treasuries, when you buy government treasuries, your returns will just be
That makes sense.
5.38%, and several other things. All right, for me, the problem with Nigeria's economy, I do not think we should really focus on using monetary policies, right, to solve it, because our inflation is increasing at an exponential rate, and for things like that, you monetary policy don't are not really effective in things like that, because monetary policy basically curbs what you call crawling inflation, right? So as of now, we're not crawling level of crawling inflation anymore, right? Inflation is increasing at an exponential rate. So using monetary policies, things like maybe increase in cash reserve ratio, so there won't be so much money in circulation. Things like increasing lending rates, so it will discourage borrowers. Things like that would not really curb inflation, at a rate that we want it to really repair our economy, right? So increasing of NPR might be a good move, but looking at it from the angle of investment, I don't think it is, right? Because NPR has been increased already 4 times this year, which is the highest in Nigeria's history, right? 4 times. We've had it increase from, I think, about 16.5% to the present figure, which is about 18.5. Right. So you can see the government is taking measures, right, to help stabilize the economy. But now the big question mark is, are those preventive measures or curbing measures, are they the right ones? And for me, it's a no, because I don't think using monetary policy as at now is the right move to use. Maybe increasing cash reserve ratios would not really solve our problem, because as at now we have too much money chasing fewer goods. What we need to do is focus on helping the productive sector of the economy, right, to help it to boost the productive sector, right, so the production of goods and services in the economy would match the money in circulation, right? So there will be an equilibrium point at that instance. So instead of just trying to reduce the total number of money in circulation correcting without correcting the issue of low productivity in the economy, it wouldn't still make sense, because even though you reduce the money to a very drastic point, your main problem now is the productive part, right, of the economy that is not working, and we're not really focusing on that. I think one measure that we could use, right, is tax holidays for producing companies or industrialized firms, right? So tax holidays are things rather that firms enjoy a lot. I know as at when Dangote started, he enjoyed at least a long run of tax holidays where he did not pay tax for a particular period of time. So when he probably reached number of operating years, I think it's 5 or 8 years now, right, you start paying your tax from there. So things like that actually motivates, right, people to invest in infrastructural sectors, and thereby increasing productivity. So for me, monetary policy right now isn't the right move to use to correct a level of inflation and other microeconomic issues in the country. Thank you. I think it could go either ways, to be honest, because for a very long time now we've seen an increase in government budget, and that increase in government expenditure basically is an expansionary fiscal policy, right? So we've seen that over the years, but at the end of the day, when expenditure is increasing but you are not seeing the results, it is useless, right? And I think the tax sector basically is a very deficient sector in this country. So even you saying reduction of tax, it would not still make sense, because at the end of the day, over 70% of businesses in Nigeria do not pay tax, right? Taking into consideration SMEs and things like that. So when you look at it, it just the structures are not in place for these policies to work, right? Both fiscal and monetary policy, at the end of the day. But if I was to choose, I would still go with fiscal policy, to be honest, right? So government should invest in selective sectors, right? Increase expenditure in selective sector. As our last fiscal year, we saw that non-oil sectors was contributed largest to Nigeria's economic growth. So that's a very good indicator for our economy, right? That diversifying away from oil can also really help us. Maybe diversifying into other productive activities, agriculture, and not just agriculture, value added agriculture, and things like that. So these things would also help us. So I think as a now, fiscal policy should expansionary fiscal policy should be the way to go about things. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that, Friday. Okay, Jesse, can we have your take on that question? What's one physical policy that you anticipate?
Okay, thank you so much.
Thank
Faraday has already addressed from the standpoint of tax, in terms of tax holidays and the likes, and that is very instrumental tool that can be used. And some other things he mentioned, right? So let me just speak from the standpoint of expenditure, right? For an economy to grow, there are some key things that have to be considered. And one thing that has to be considered is infrastructural investment and industrial investment. If an economy is not spending on these things, or we are spending the money we're meant to spend on these things, or maybe political leader remuneration, where in Nigeria now, as the case may be, we have some government officials collecting millions and millions of naira that can be expended into other productive activities. So, from the standpoint of expenditure, we have to um, position our expenditure funnel into addressing key issues that will foster economic growth. What are these key issues? Industrialization, infrastructural growth, infrastructural improvements. I mean, in an economy that has poor or low industrialization, we can't grow, we can't expand, no matter the policy that is implemented, or no matter what we have going on. If we do not have productive capacity, if we do not have good level of infrastructural development, how do we want to foster investment? How do we want to foster economic growth? It is not possible. So I feel like the federal government should address expenditure and address the direction to which this expenditure